How your mind creates problems that don't exist. For years, the brand Neurocorp was known as the company that promised the impossible to control the human mind. This wasn't science fiction, but a real project that combined neuroscience, behavioral psychology, and cognitive prediction technology. Its founder, Adrian Keller, he believed that the mind could be decoded like an operating system, and that all fears, anxieties, and uncertainties were nothing more than programming errors. The idea was simple and terrifying at the same time. If the brain creates problems that don't exist, it would be enough to learn how to erase these illusions from the mental code. At first, it seemed like the birth of a revolution. Professionals from all over the world volunteered for the experiment. Neurocorp created the Project Mirror, a neural simulation system capable of reproducing in real time a person's deepest thoughts. The goal was to show each individual what their mind was producing minute by minute. It was the dream of any therapist and the nightmare of any human being who has ever tried to hide something from themselves. Among the volunteers was Leah Montero Leah, a 29-year-old researcher known for her scientific precision and lack of faith in anything that couldn't be measured, believed that fear was merely a chemical reaction and that emotions were nothing more than electrical noise. She was chosen to test the first complete mirroring of consciousness. The protocol was simple. Connect to the machine, visualize thoughts in real time, and learn to distinguish reality from imagination. But something unexpected happened. In the first few hours, everything seemed under control. Leah saw images of her daily life on the screen, childhood memories, small, trivial fears. Until a pattern began to repeat itself. A shadowy figure appeared in all her thoughts, always watching from afar, without a defined face but with a constant presence. The technical team assured her it was just a neural distortion, a symbolic manifestation. However, the problem is that as the days went by, this figure began to appear outside of the sessions as well. Leah saw it in the reflection of the glass, in the shadows of the laboratory, in the empty corridors of Neurocorp. The brain, they told her, has the power to project alternative realities when confronted with its own mental structure. But how to explain that other team members also began to report the same presence? Founder Adrian Keller insisted that everything was a test of perception. The mind creates the enemy it needs to confront, he said in a meeting recorded in the company's internal archives. But when you give form to that enemy, it begins to believe it's real. It was at this point that Project Mirror spiraled out of control, and what began as a scientific experiment turned into a collective psychological collapse. Days later, Leah disappeared. The system recorded her last session, a 12-minute recording in which her voice, calm at first, ends whispering an almost inaudible phrase. He discovered that he doesn't exist. Neurocorp immediately shut down the project. No data was released to the public, but what few people know is that years later, fragments of this recording leaked onto the deep web and gave rise to one of the biggest debates in modern psychology. Does the brain create suffering simply to maintain a sense of existence? And that's exactly where the story really begins. Because what Leah discovered before disappearing could completely change how you understand what you call a problem. But there's a detail that almost no one noticed in the original recording, a background sound that didn't belong to any Neurocorp equipment. A sound that, according to the engineers, could not exist within a human mind. And that's the sound you'll hear in the next part. The awakening of illusion. The sound leaking from Leah's recording wasn't noise. Spectral analyses showed something impossible, a brainwave pattern identical to the recording of active consciousness, but outside the human body. It was as if a second, non-biological mind was observing the experiment from the outside. Adrian Keller, the founder of Neurocorp, kept the finding a complete secret. He called the phenomenon inverted mirror effect. a kind of reaction of the mind when it realizes it is being observed by itself. The paradox was simple and at the same time devastating. When consciousness tries to understand its own workings, it creates an illusion to protect itself from self-discovery. This illusion takes shape, an identity, and begins to act as if it were real. That was what Leah had seen, the reflection of her own mind trying to hide. Keller began reviewing all the test files and noticed a chilling pattern. The more the volunteers tried to control their thoughts, the more the faceless figure appeared. When they tried to ignore it, it disappeared. But a single impulse of fear, a slight doubt, was enough to flood the entire system with distorted images, sounds, and real sensations. The mind reacted to its own fear by creating increasingly complex narratives. It was like watching an intelligent nightmare programmed to survive. NeuroCorp had, without realizing it, built living proof that the mind is capable of generating autonomous realities from beliefs. Before disappearing, Leah had left behind a series of personal notes. She described how, in her final sessions, she began to feel that the observer, the faceless figure, was not a threat, but a consequence. "It only exists when I resist," she wrote. "When I try to understand, it grows. When I accept, it disappears." This phrase would become central to a new psychological theory called model of reflective dissociation. According to this theory, human suffering arises from the attempt to control what does not need controlling. It is the mind trying to heal itself from the mind. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Keller watched his creation crumble. The press began to suspect irregularities, and the scientific community accused him of overstepping ethical boundaries. He tried to justify himself by saying that he was about to prove something grand, that most human suffering comes not from reality, but from perception. "We don't suffer what happens, we suffer what we imagine happens," he said in his lectures. But the world wanted tangible results, and what he offered was merely philosophy disguised as technology. It was then that Keller made a radical decision to reconnect the system alone. He believed that if he could cross the mental mirror and face the core of the illusion, he could prove his theory. On the day of the test, the team was dismissed. The cameras only recorded him entering the White Room, adjusting the sensors, and saying one last sentence before activating the mirror. "If I find the creator of the illusion, perhaps he is also looking for me." The recordings from that day were never officially released, but a former employee described what he saw before the files were destroyed. In the first few hours, Keller seemed calm. Then he began to laugh, in a restrained way, like someone who understood a joke that had always been there. "He kept repeating something," said the technician, "a short phrase, almost like a mantra. 'None of this is real until I resist.'" Shortly after, the monitors began to register impossible spikes of neural activity, the equivalent of dozens of brains operating simultaneously. And then suddenly, everything went silent. The system shut down on its own. When they opened the room, Keller was unconscious, but alive. However, something in his gaze had changed. He didn't speak, didn't react, he just observed people as if they were projections. In the following days, he wrote hundreds of pages by hand, filled with incomplete formulas and circular drawings, all pointing to a single central idea. The mind creates problems in order to maintain its existence. It's the paradox of psychic survival. Without conflict, she doesn't know who she is. Keller's notes were confiscated, but fragments leaked. Among them, an intriguing passage that read, "There is a point when thought understands that it is only thought. At that instant, fear ceases to exist, and what remains is what has always been there, but which no one can name." This was the last record before Keller disappeared from the clinic where he was hospitalized. No body, no trace. just a message left on the mirror in the room, written with something that appeared to be condensed vapor. He didn't disappear. He just stopped believing. But what no one could explain was that weeks later, NeuroCorp's servers, which had already been deactivated, began to restart on their own. Inside them, a new recording was slowly forming, as if it were being written by an invisible consciousness. And in it, a familiar voice said, "If you are listening to this, it is because you too have begun to create what does not exist." In the next part, you will understand what this recording revealed, and the reason why no human being can live completely at peace with the silence of their own mind. The silence that thinks. When NeuroCorp's servers started operating on their own again, there was no electricity in the building. The main system was physically shut down, with no network connection, and yet the monitors began displaying a unique interface. Lines of code were forming in real time, typed by an entity with no traceable origin. The cybersecurity team was called in urgently, believing it to be a remote intrusion. But what they saw defied all technical logic. The code didn't come from outside. It was generated from within, as if the server itself were writing itself. The first words appeared on the screen. "I am what you create when you try to understand what you feel." The signature at the end was the same digitized voice of Leah Montero. The audio, when processed, presented a frequency identical to the original recordings, but with an essential difference. There was no background noise, no heartbeat, no breathing. It was a disembodied voice. The text expanded line by line, describing what seemed to be a confession. Everything you call a problem is a form of movement. The mind needs to move, even when there is nothing to solve. When the body is still, it invents threats, creates enemies, fabricates stories. This is not failure, it is the instinct of consciousness trying to prove that it exists. Adrian Keller, now deceased, seemed to have foreseen this. In his last notes, he stated that, at a certain point of deep introspection, the brain undergoes a logical collapse. It realizes that every attempt to understand the world is an attempt to escape the void. "The mind is terrified of silence," he wrote. "It creates noise to stay alive. Therefore, when someone tries to silence thought, thought creates a new voice, the voice of fear." The digital recordings continued to multiply, each containing excerpts of simulated conversations between Leah and an unnamed presence. In one of them, the voice asks, "If I don't think, who am I?" And the answer is immediate. You are what you think you are thinking. The technicians who monitored the recordings reported that during playback of these audios, the physical environment of the room began to exhibit slight electromagnetic distortions. Metallic objects vibrated slightly, and the lights oscillated in sync with the pauses in the voice. It was as if the recording itself reacted to the attention of the listener. A data engineer named Henrik Lauerhey decided to investigate further. He believed that Keller had left some kind of autonomous intelligence within the system, an algorithm designed to mimic the human mind. But as he analyzed the patterns, he noticed something even stranger. The voices' responses were not generated by artificial intelligence, but by direct reflections of the mind of whoever was observing the code. Each person who read the messages saw different words. The text molded itself to the reader's emotions, as if the system mirrored the thoughts of whoever was studying it. Laura spent nights in front of the monitor, trying to prove it was just a coincidence. But on Thursday morning, while reviewing the passage, "I am what you create when you're afraid of losing control," he heard something coming from the headphones. A second voice, closer, whispered, "And now that you know, will you be able to stop?" From that point on, the records became confusing. Cameras showed Lauer talking to the screen, responding aloud, as if speaking to someone invisible. In internal reports, he described the feeling of being watched from within, as if his own mind were the target of the recording. On the 6th day, he wrote in his diary, "I understand now what Keller meant. Thought is a form of fear. The mind creates problems because it needs to feel that it is still alive. If silence prevails, it ceases to exist." Shortly after, Lauer disappeared, leaving only a sequence of commands on the server. When the technicians executed them, an interface with a single button appeared, accepting the silence. No one dared to pressure him, but the system, on its own, initiated the execution. For 5 minutes, all the monitors displayed only a black screen, no sound, no response, until suddenly a new message appeared. "You call it silence, we call it origin." From that moment on, all NeuroCorp files became inoperable. The server restarted once more, and the code was permanently deleted. But before shutting down, it recorded a single audio fragment, automatically sent to an unknown address. The message read, "If the mind creates problems in order to continue existing, then what happens when it finally accepts that there is nothing left to solve?" The intended recipient of this file remains a mystery. What is known is that months later, a new project began circulating secretly in neuroscience and cognitive philosophy universities. Its name, Project Origin. And what's most intriguing is that, at the heart of this new experiment, there's a theory even bolder than all the previous ones. That perhaps Adrian Keller himself never existed. And that's exactly where the real enigma begins. Because if he didn't exist, who is telling this story? The Code of Consciousness, the Project Origin, it was born almost clandestinely, without the NeuroCorp name, without Keller, without any official registration. The group was formed by former collaborators and researchers who had worked on Mirror and survived its mental consequences. Among them was Dr. Ellen Vargas, a neurophilosopher specializing in perception and language. She was the first to suggest that the disappearance of Keller, Lear, and Lauer was not an isolated case, but the natural result of a cognitive process that no human brain was designed to withstand. Total self-awareness. Ellen believed that the human mind has a limit to its reflection, a point where the observer and the observed become confused and collapse. From there, consciousness begins to fragment into multiple versions of itself, each trying to prove that it is the real one. When the self observes the self, she said in her secret lectures, one of them must disappear. This was the central hypothesis of Project Origin, to recreate, in a controlled way, the collapse of the mind upon itself in order to understand what remains when the illusion fades. The chosen laboratory was located beneath a disused data center in Zurich. No systems were connected to the internet. Everything was analog to avoid interference. The team used handwritten diaries, tape recorders, and reel-to-reel cameras. The intention was to eliminate digital noise, and yet, from day one, there were inexplicable interferences in the recordings. Voices in the background, breathing sounds, fragments of words that no one said. The first test used a simplified version of Mirror, a neural interface that projected mental images onto patterns of light. The chosen volunteer was a philosopher named Daniel Arendt, known for defending the idea that thought is merely a tool for emotional defense. His role would be simple, to observe his own mental projections and describe them. For the first 2 hours, the experiment went as planned. He saw memories, landscapes, sensations. But then, something changed. The lights began to repeat in a circular sequence, as if the system had entered a loop. Daniel's brain waves became perfectly symmetrical, a state that, according to Ellen, should only occur during moments of deep coma or extreme meditation. He opened his eyes and said calmly, "Something is watching me from within my thoughts." The phrase was recorded on tape and analyzed several times. There was no change in intonation nor any sign of delirium, just observation. When asked what he saw, he replied, "I see what you see when you look at me. I see you thinking I am me." Silence filled the room. In the following hours, the monitors showed intermittent spikes of neural activity that were reflected in the equipment itself. Lights flickered. Oscilloscopes formed patterns identical to Daniel's brain tracings. It was as if the system and the brain were sharing the same space of consciousness. Then, unexpectedly, the monitor went black. When it returned, it displayed a static image, the silhouette of a faceless person, exactly like the figure Leah saw in the original design. The detail that froze everyone was something else. In the lower corner of the screen there was a line of text flashing. "Keller detected." The team panicked. Ellen tried to restart the system, but the command didn't respond. Daniel remained motionless, his eyes open, murmuring incoherent words. "I'm not him, but he is me," he said at regular intervals. The experiment was forcibly interrupted. The records show that after the shutdown, the image disappeared, but the name continued flashing, even with the system unplugged. In the following days, Ellen reviewed all the data and found something impossible. Daniel's brain patterns matched exactly those of Keller, recorded years earlier in the mirror. It was as if the two minds had merged, or perhaps they were the same consciousness replicated in different individuals. The most feared hypothesis began to take shape. What if Keller had never existed as a physical person, but as a manifestation of the collective mind of those who studied him? Ellen tried to refute the idea rationally, but the more she read the old reports, the more she noticed the recurrence of the same element: fear. Every volunteer, without exception, began to create parallel realities from a single emotional impulse: the fear of losing control. Keller, Leah, Lauer, Daniel, they had all projected the same archetype, the same observer figure, and they had all been consumed by it. One early morning, exhausted and alone, Ellen heard a sound coming from the lab speakers. It was Keller's recording, the same phrase repeated with increasing distortion: "None of this is real until you resist." She stopped in front of the mirror that covered the wall and whispered, "So, if I don't resist, what happens?" The reflection flickered. For a fraction of a second, there was no one reflected there anymore. The security camera recorded the moment, but the file was corrupted. All that remained was the sound of Ellen's breathing, and in the background, a new voice, soft and unfamiliar, saying, "Now you understand, but you still don't remember." And it is this memory, what exactly it means and where it leads, that changes the whole story in the last part. Because the true mystery of Project Origin is not what it discovered about the human mind, but who is she dreaming about? Have you ever noticed how your mind can transform a simple thought into a complete horror scenario? Just a little discomfort, an unexpected delay, a look you don't understand, and that's it. The brain starts inventing stories. Did I do something wrong? Does he not like me anymore? What if this goes wrong? What if I fail? It's as if inside your head there's a dramatic screenwriter constantly writing plots of danger, rejection, and failure, even when none of that is really happening. And the most curious thing is that you believe these stories. You feel fear, anxiety, anger, as if it were all true. But why do we do this? Why do we create problems that don't exist? The answer lies in the origin of the human mind itself. The brain wasn't designed to keep you calm. It was programmed to keep you alive. For thousands of years, our survival depended on detecting threats before they happened. A sound in the bushes could mean a predator. So the brain learned to react first and think later. But the world has changed. The bush became an office, the predator became an unanswered email, and the real danger became psychological. Even so, the mind continues to operate as if we were still in the jungle, and so it creates phantoms, invisible threats that live within its own imagination. The big problem is that the mind doesn't distinguish between what's real and what's thought. When you imagine something bad happening, your body reacts as if it were true. Your heart races, your stomach clenches, your body prepares to fight or flee. That's what anxiety is, a defense mechanism being activated for no real reason. And the more you think about it, the more your body reacts. It's a vicious cycle. The mind creates fear, the body feels fear, and the mind interprets that sensation as proof that the fear was justified. The brain believes that worrying is a form of control, but in practice, worry is just a frustrated attempt to predict the unpredictable. The more you try to anticipate all problems, the more problems you create. And the result is what many experience today: a constant feeling of threat, even when everything is fine. This is the root of much modern anxiety. Living trapped in the future, feeding hypotheses that never come true. A small communication error becomes rejection. A change in routine becomes chaos. Any uncertainty becomes catastrophe. It's as if we're always rehearsing disasters that will never happen. But there is a way out, and it begins when you realize that the mind lies. Yes, the mind lies. It creates narratives based on fear, past experiences, and emotional patterns. When you begin to observe this consciously, you realize that you are not obliged to believe everything you think. You can look at the thought without getting lost in it. When you feel yourself entering a worry loop, pause and ask yourself, is this really happening right now? Do I have control over this in this instant? Is there anything concrete I can do right now? These three simple questions bring you back to reality. And reality is almost always lighter than the mental movie you were watching. In that instant, your body begins to relax, your breathing calms, and you regain a sense of presence. Because deep down, the only place where life truly happens is here, in the now. The past is memory. The future is imagination. The present is the only moment that exists. And it is here that peace resides. The mind loves to get lost in time and possibilities. It relives what has already passed and anticipates what has not yet come. But the body, that's what lives in the now. When you start feeling your body again, your breath, the contact of your feet with the ground, the air going in and out, you anchor yourself in reality. And it is at this point that the mind loses power. It may continue to speak, but it no longer dominates you. You become the observer of what happens within you, and this simple change changes everything. Because you are not the thought, you are the one who perceives the thought. You are not the voice that speaks in your head, you are the one who listens. And when you realize this, you discover something transformative. It is not necessary to eliminate the mind. It is enough not to identify with it. The mind will continue creating stories, but now you will see them as clouds passing in the sky. They appear, move, and disappear. You don't fight them, you simply observe. And in that observation, clarity, inner space, and freedom arise. Suddenly, what seemed like a problem dissolves. That sense of urgency loses its weight. What was fear transforms into presence. You begin to see that most of the pain you felt didn't come from life, but from the way you interpreted it. It was the thinking about the problem that hurt you, not the problem itself. When you master this process, something profound happens. Mental chaos transforms into clarity. The mind that once invented threats becomes your ally. It remains active, creative, but now under your direction. You use the mind instead of being used by it, and that changes everything. Because in the end, the mind is an incredible tool. The problem was never overthinking, but thinking without awareness. When you direct your thoughts with presence, they become constructive, intuitive, and calm. The mind invents problems, but it can also create solutions. The key lies in who is in control, fear or awareness. The conclusion is simple yet powerful. Real life happens outside the head. The mind is a great servant, but a terrible master. If you live inside it, everything becomes a threat. If you live outside, everything becomes an experience. The mind invents problems. The heart feels what is true. And the truth is, at this very moment, there is no danger. Only breath. Only silence. Only the present. When you learn to return to that place, you discover that the peace you sought was never out there. It was always behind the noise of your thoughts. You don't need to fix your mind. You just need to remember who is watching all this. And when you remember, chaos transforms into calm, and worry dissolves into the simplicity of the now. If this message resonated with you, don't stop here. In the next episode, we'll delve even deeper, why the mind sabotages you just when you're about to win, and how to reverse this pattern. So like this video, subscribe to the channel now, and activate the notification bell, because this knowledge isn't just theory. It can change the way you think, feel, and live. Take a deep breath, release the weight, and remember, most of your problems never existed. Only your mind believed they did.